from Councillor Collins and Councillor Ogilvie, and I believe Councillors Carruthers and Scobie are en route. Thank you.
Councillor Lever. Right, move on to item 2, declarations of interest. Councillor Dykes.
Thank you, Chair. I declared an interest in the item to do with the stove at the last meeting, and therefore, as this is a deferred item, I will continue that declaration of interest.
Councillor Maitland.
I'm in the same position, please, Leader. My husband is a director of the Chamber of Commerce.
Councillor Carson.
The same reasons. I'm a former director of Chamber of Commerce.
Councillor Geddes.
Page 185, sir, Appendix 2, in item 14, reference is made to Swiss-Trans. I'm a director of Swiss-Trans. My basic instinct is to say that I would wish my role to be noted, but I don't feel that there's any need for me to quit the meeting during this particular item of business. But I appreciate guidance on that basis, albeit, Leader, the decision ultimately is mine.
Thank you, Leader. Just confirm with Councillor Geddes specifically, yes, the declaration's noted, but given the interest, it would be appropriate for you to stay in under discussion of that item, given the interest.
As there's no other declarations of interest, move on to item 3, minute of 16th of July. Can we take this as noted? I take no response that we are noting that one. Now move on to item 4, the adoption of major festival and event strategy for Dumfries and Galloway. We have the report before us. Is there any factual updates to the report?
Nothing to add, Leader. Happy to take questions from the members.
Over to members. Councillor Dykes.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that I'm pleased to see this here. I think it's very important that we have a central event strategy, and I look forward to participating in it as it moves forward. So, thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Thanks, Chair. There's no doubt that this is the sort of clear direction of travel that members wanted. But, there's been a real issue over the number of not just events, but also, I have to say, organisations that have basically been directed to area committees by officers that, frankly, are not area issues. They are region-wide issues, and major events is certainly one of them. This area committee in particular have been hit by the fact that the regional capital is obviously Dumfries, and a lot of major regional and, frankly, international events take place there. And we've had bids that have used up a huge part of the area committee's discretionary funds, purely because Dumfries happens to be the largest town, and I think that's been a real problem. This area committees are there to deal with area issues, not regional and national events. So I welcome the fact that we're actually moving away from that reliance. The only thing I'm a bit concerned about is the sort of random figure that's in the report, that's asking us to note the fact there's a £300,000 annual funding requirement, but there's no information at all to actually justify that particular figure. I have no idea where that figure comes from, and I would like to see far more details as to what the funding is. The report sort of following a habit of this committee today that basically says anything that requires funding has to be considered by groups as part of the budget setting process. I'm sure we'll see a lot more of those reports over the next few weeks from officers as well, but I would like to see a lot more details as to where this £300,000 figure actually comes from. Some of these events that are contained within the strategy are events that frankly already receive funding from some council departments. There are events that receive funding from the Arts Commission that we have. Now we have a £210,000 Art Commission. I have absolutely no idea whatsoever what that money is spent on. We've never had a single monitoring report on this commission, and in fact that's a problem right across the council that we commission things and I don't know whether they're scrutinised or monitored because I never see reports on it. So there's an issue. I think what we need to have is a lot more detail as to where that figure came from and what the train of thought is on how much money will, I presume, will be proposed to come from civic pride funding, will come from policy development funding, etc. And I haven't got that information. So how can I know the funding requirement when I have absolutely no idea where that came from?
Mr. Graveson.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I think it's fair to say that, that this report, this strategy has been a consolidation of a significant amount of work across a range of partners, and the funding that is proposed has very much been driven by the funding that's currently in place and is required by those specific events and organisations. However, Leader, I'm happy to provide more detailed information to members moving forward in terms of the exact level of and detail and nature of how that figure's been produced.
Therefore, I presume we can't agree the strategy, because we're always told by governance you can't agree with something unless you've got the funding in place. So presumably we're noting it until we've got the funding in place. I mean, imagine if we agreed the strategy today but decided not to put the funding in place. That would raise an interesting governance issue. Just on the practicalities of it as well, most of the proposals that are highlighted are external events, such as the Big Burn Supper, the Wigton Book Festival, but they're also the Youth Beats event, which is a council event. And I want to know, from a practical point of view, what does that actually mean in terms of the running of the Youth Beats event, because that's something that this Daily Committee have obviously worked on over a considerable period of time, and I would hate to see a situation whereby a committee that actually puts a lot of support into that particular event effectively loses not control of the event, but simply the event is passed effectively to this committee to deal with, just because it happens to be contained within the major event strategy. I would have thought that is a Nistale area committee event that is run by CLD in Nistale, and if that event effectively wants to bid in for funding from this event strategy, then so be it, but it's still an event that is basically organised, if you like, and led by Nistale area committee, and I'd want assurance that would continue to be the case, and it won't certainly be transferred to this committee, because actually, that is certainly not what Nistale area committee would like to see happen.
Mr. Grayson.
Thank you, Leader. That certainly, the strategy has been developed very much based on endeavouring to make some very specific criteria around what is a regional and a national event, and therefore what can qualify for funding under this major events strategy. I think certainly from discussions at Area Committee previously, that's been a real concern. So this strategy has endeavoured to bring some clarity in relation to that. However, where there are local events that are significant, I think we'd be very pleased to continue to report their progress and their performance back through area committees through the relevant process.
And I think with regard to the governance arrangements, it's quite clear under 2.5 that we are getting a report back for the governance arrangements and for the management of the funding of the programme. So that would come then.
But it's how can you agree something without actually putting the funding in place? We're always told every time we try and propose something, you need to tell us where the funds are going to come from. Well, we're being asked to agree something here without really having the details of the funds. I'm quite happy to know what the strategy is saying, but until you actually see we may change it when we see the detail of the funds. It may decide that we don't actually want a £300,000 major event strategy. We may want a £200,000 major event strategy, because when we see the breakdown of the funds, we might want to tweak the criteria. So until we actually know where we're, if you suddenly turn around and tell us tomorrow that all £300,000 is coming from civic pride funding from area committees, then frankly you won't get a lot of support. So until we actually see what the funding arrangements are being proposed and where this £300,000 figure comes from, then I'm loath to agree to something without actually seeing that detail. Quite happy to note the report. It's a consultant's report anyway, whatever that costs, but I want to see the financial detail as to before I agree to the strategy.
Right. Councillor Geddes.
Well, can I say, as far as I'm concerned, Leader, that I also regard this as being very much a major step in the right direction. I take the point that Councillor Smith is making in relation to sort of scrutinising of the figure there, which is mentioned in 2.2, and also in the body of the report, the £300,000 annual funding requirement. There is an obligation, I would suggest, on the production of reports of this type, to make it clear just exactly where that funding is anticipated will come from. And I think the comments he's making in that regard are valid. Having said that, I wouldn't want to do anything today which will hold it up, as it were, the development of or the ongoing process in developing these proposals and bringing them through to a much needed fruition. Councillor Smith also makes reference, and again rightly so in my opinion, that this to me is only one part of the equation, because if we agree the principle of this, and I hope we will today, in relation to events and festivals, etc., I think we should be looking for a parallel report as soon as possible in relation to such as strategic organisations. And I'm not here today, Leader, as it were, to make a case for any particular organisation. That would be inappropriate at this stage. But I think we should be carrying that through logically. Our logic would dictate that we'd carry that through in a parallel report for other similar organisations, or for similar organisations which have a regional strategic context.
Councillor McClung.
Yeah, thanks, Leader. Page 26, 615, it says that the harbours and marina have not to date been used for major maritime events. What are we going to define as a major maritime event?
Mr. Barr.
The Council works with a variety of partners on the Sail West initiative, and we monitor what events we can bring to our harbours through Sail West. You also need capacity on the ground in terms of organisations in our coastal areas, and through the events toolkit and through the work of CCS to build community capacity in Stranraer, the Rins, the Mackers, and across our coastal areas. We're continuously monitoring that gap in our portfolio at the moment.
Yeah, thanks for that. You were aware that there was 2 events in Loch Ryan this year. One was the British round and one was the Scottish round, of different classes of yachts. Don't ask me which ones they were, but I know there was a Scottish round and a British round.
That point will be noted, and we'll make sure that it's covered in future. Councillor McComb.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst welcoming this strategy, I would echo Councillor Geddes' point about strategic organisations and facilities, which may well attract visitors on an international basis, that these organisations require to be considered on a strategic basis rather than simply a drain on area committee funding. I would also highlight the fact that very shortly there will be a rally event taking place in the Mackers of Wigtonshire, which the rally enthusiasts assure me is of national importance, and it is not listed along with the other events here.
Councillor Carson.
Thanks, Chair. I obviously I agree with a lot of my colleagues. We welcome this moving forward, and there's certainly been a requirement to have some sort of central fund for delivering national and international events. On recommendation 2.5, just want to ensure that the report that's brought to the committee does ensure that there is member involvement to look at these events and scrutinise them, to make sure that the other points raised by members regarding other organisations being funded through this are actually looked at appropriately.
Councillor Nichols.
Thank you, Chair. The youth beats was mentioned, and Richard saying, there'll be reports back to the area committee. I've got concerns, that it's an area committee, it's an industrial area event as such. It's run by the team there as well. But does it actually meet the criteria within the strategy? I think on page 24, about 4.2. Does it have to, this definition of a major event, does it have to meet all that criteria?
Youth Beats does meet most of the criteria, but not all, Councillor, and it's also unique within this list in that it's purely for an internal Dumfries and Galloway audience. So the points are well made, and I think that we would need to consider how we support the financial requirements of Youth Beats, perhaps partly through the strategy and partly through a partnership with Nithsdale Area Committee, if that's what members wish.
Councillor Dick.
Thank you, Chair. I too welcome this strategy. Could I just ask that when further reports come forward and we're looking at the funding for strategic and regional events, whether it be festivals, events of this nature, or for that matter any other strategic projects, that we're looking at all aspects of funding, not just what the Council puts towards it. There are many other areas that I think perhaps have not been given appropriate consideration. And also very close scrutiny of how that money is used once it is allocated to any project, festival or event.
The strategy, whilst focused on major events, also enables CCS to take a holistic approach to the delivery of events across Dumfries and Galloway. Working with CCS and all other council directorates will monitor events, how we can grow events, and we'll use the events toolkit that this council has published and which has received positive feedback from Event Scotland to grow capacity, grow the sector and develop knowledge and expertise across the council.
Councillor McGregor.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to make a very brief point about page 40. We have a list of events. Many of them have started off as very much area sort of based events and have sort of morphed into larger, possibly more regional style events. And I would say that that's the case with Youth Beats. And it was certainly an argument that was made at Andale-Nestdale Area Committee for us to give them funding, that it had morphed out with Nestdale. And I think the area committees also funded that particular event, which would suggest to me that it is no longer in isolation in Nestdale event. And certainly the press releases that went out on the back of it was that all tickets had been sold to use from across the entire region. So as I say, I would sort of identify that now, although Nestdale have done a fantastic job setting it up, that it has morphed into actually, a regional event, which is now funded by all 4 areas within the region.
With that, we have the recommendations. Councillor Smith.
I would certainly make a few changes to the recommendations. Well, the agreement certainly I would be happy to note that the strategy rather than agree it at this stage. I would take out 2.2 and 2.3. I'd keep in 2.4 and I would amend 2.5 to read to agree to receive a further report to this committee to detail the governance arrangements for the delivery of the strategy and the management of its funding programme and outlining in detail the funding options available. I think that we need that information.
Just repeat those sort of points so that everybody has them.
Motion from Councillor Smith, seconded by Councillor Nicholson, is in effect to note the major event strategy as outlined at 2.1, delete recommendations 2.2 and 2.3, retain recommendation 2.4 and keep recommendation 2.5 with the addition that outline a detailed report in relation to the funding requirements.
Councillor Carson.
We adopt the recommendations as in the paper.
All members clear of the motion and the amendment? Happy to go to the vote. Councillor Hislop.
Amendment.
Councillor Carruthers, not here. Councillor Carson.
Amendment.
Councillor Dick.
Amendment.
Councillor Dykes. Councillor Geddes. Councillor Lever. Councillor McGregor. Councillor Maitland.
Amendment.
Councillor Marsh here. Councillor McCottray.
Motion.
Councillor McClung.
Amendment.
Councillor McComb.
Amendment.
Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Nicholl.
Amendment.
Councillor Scobie.
Dane.
Councillor Smith. Decision of the committee to agree the amendment 10 votes to 4. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Court.
Just a bit of housekeeping. If you go to page 24, 4.3, it says the current list of festivals, etc., can be found in Appendix D. No, they can't. Appendix D refers to fests. The current list of festivals can be found in Appendix C. Sorry to be pedantic, but I do like to be accurate.
Noted, and we'll have the report amended accordingly. Move on to item 5, Legacy Plan, Dumfries and Galloway, Welcomes 2014. Have the report in front of us. Is there any factual updates? Mr. Greaveson?
Nothing further to add, Chair, other than to say that this has been a very exciting and challenging piece of work. I think Dumfries and Galloway is leading the way on a national scale through the Solace Working Group. Our legacy plan as presented to members today is being used as an example of best practice for others to follow. So happy to present that to members today, Leader.
I know yesterday we had a group of youngsters from Belbete High School, and they gave us an example of what they're doing in their role towards the legacy and how they're rolling out, and I thought it was a really good presentation we had. Any questions from members? Councillor Maitland?
No, I simply welcome this report. Councillor Collins, Councillor Wiper and I attended a legacy proposal and a suggestion of activity at Cuckoobury Primary, where I was absolutely bowled over by the enthusiasm for the young people. Really, you know, the development and the knowledge that they showed of the whole issue was really quite startling. So I think this will be good to build on that.
Councillor Dick?
Just endorse that very welcome report and happy to go with the recommendations.
Councillor Smith?
I think like everyone very much welcome the importance placed by the council on the whole issue of the legacy plan. I think it's obviously a major piece of work. I would though question some of the accuracies of the legacy plan. I mean, I think there's a danger that what we effectively do is we put things in it that are actually already happening anyway and have absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the legacy of the Commonwealth Games or any other major events. And I think that's the case in one or two of the items that have been put in there. It ticks the boxes of the criteria, but actually whether or not the Commonwealth Games, Ryder Cup or anything else was taking place, these things were actually already going ahead. And I think it's a wee bit kind of, I know why we have to do it, we've got to tick certain boxes, but some of these things have been included there that are actually, if there was no Commonwealth Games, would be going ahead anyway. So to the extent in which quite a lot of these things are legacy or ongoing good work of the council remains to be seen. There's also some within the legacy plan though that have never been agreed by certain committees, and I go to the example of the Go Smart scheme within the plan that talks about being rolled out to communities of 2,000 and more. Now, I know that's what officers wanted to see. I know that's what was in the report that went to Planning, House and Environment Services Committee and they wanted to see. That was in the recommendation, but councillors rejected that. And councillors asked for further reports and more detail before we agreed to that. But for some reason it's been included in this without actually having been agreed by members. So I would question whether or not all these things actually are with the agreement of members, or are we just going to bypass what decisions other committees have actually made when it comes to drawing up this programme. So I would ask that that be double checked, because that certainly wasn't what was agreed at the PH&E committee when it comes to the Go Smart scheme. In fact, members had a lot of concerns about it, and I come back to the point as well, there is a lot in here that a lot of really good initiatives, a lot of initiatives that have clearly came as a result of the legacy, but there are certainly others that are there just because they're ongoing work of the council.
Do we know if that's the case, if all committee decisions were incorporated in?
Apologies. In terms of the ghost mark, I will check with our colleagues who are leading on the flourishing agenda as part of the legacy plan. There was certainly intention to cross-reference any previous committee decisions, but we'll check on that one and happy to feedback, Leader.
Councillor Geddes.
Just a minor observation, sir. You'll see paragraph 2.2, it says, note the funding required to deliver the plan at £100,000, and when you go over the page, page 46, you see indicative budget requirements. It's clearly stated just exactly how that figure has been arrived at and what the breakdown is. That, as far as I'm concerned, throws into even sharper focus the comments we made in relation to the previous report about lack of clarity at this stage.
With that, if there's no further points, we have the recommendations 2.1 and 2.2. Happy to agree? Move on to item 6, workforce establishment. 6-monthly monitoring report, April 2013. Mr. Callanahan, Moles. Is there any updates, factual updates to the report? Are you happy to answer questions?
There's no update to the report, Chair. Happy to answer questions.
Councillor Dick.
Thanks, Chair. Just one thing that I've concerned me for a while. We itemise bands as 1 to 9, 10 to 12, 13 to 15. Is it possible to have individual bands illustrated? And the reason I ask is that you may have, I mean, for example, on page 96, you've got Chief Exec Services, bands 10 to 12, and there are 88. I don't know whether there's 87 in band 12 and 1 in band 10, which obviously is, can make a difference when you're looking at the amount of salary we have to put in there. Is it possible to actually get them itemised?
Thanks, Chair. If members require that for the next report, happy to do so. We can pull that information out and itemise it as required.
Councillor McClung.
Yeah, thanks, Leader. It's page 98. 311, leavers. It says the majority of leavers are within bands 1 to 9, and the next major group is teachers, 28%. That leaves 15% by my calculation, but there's no breakdown of what bands they were on. Is there any possibility of getting clarification on that? And on the sickness, it states that in 319 that work-related stress is not reported as a significant cause of absence in all services. However, when you look at the breakdown in Table 9, work-related stress is the third highest reason, and we also have a separate one for stress-related disorders. Why are they separated? Surely stress is stress, whether it's stress that puts you off or an illness because you've got stress, surely they should be together. And if it's not a problem, why does every service rate it in their top 3? And surely we should be doing something to actually figure out what the work-related stress is and trying to solve that, because if we don't solve it, work-related stress only gets worse.
Mr. Callanahan.
Chair, on the first point, in terms of workforce establishment, I can answer that, and Caroline will come in on the maximising attendance. In terms of the leavers table, we don't have the breakdown that the member requires to be provided, but happy to update that beyond today, and also happy to take that on board for a future report.
We have two separate categories within our information management system, one for work-related stress and one for stress, depression, mental health. While stress, depression, mental health is ranked within the top 3, the distinction of work-related stress is underreported across all services. So what we've established is, because it's underreported, it sometimes manifests itself by frequent short-term absences, and this is something that we feed back to the services and encourage them to have discussions with employees and utilise existing processes in place.
Yeah, I realise that stress sometimes manifests itself, or sick lines come in with something other than stress written on them because of the black mark that can be put against you against stress. But if it's work-related stress, what are we doing to actually solve the problem of the work-related stress in the first place? Some of it will be because of the individual, but some of it can be, and I speak from experience, because of the organisation causing the stress.
One of the improvements we've made to our practice in the last couple of years relates to work-related stress and our practice to proactively deal with it at the point of source and try and be as preventative as possible. Within the appendix of the maximising attendance policy, there is a process that managers are required to go through, and in fact evidence with my HR colleagues that they've gone through that, and that's about getting to the underlying root of the issues and actually talking to people at a much earlier stage, we find that it's being quite effective in what it's designed to do.
Councillor Geddes.
Thanks, Leader. It's in relation to paragraph 3.12, maximising attendance and the importance of that, and also the subsequent paragraphs. I have no problems whatsoever with the benchmarking exercise that we undertook. I'm never too proud. I don't feel that we as an authority should ever be too proud to learn from good practice elsewhere. Have to be honest and say it's somewhat disappointing or somewhat underwhelming that 9 out of 32 of the other 31 authorities responded. Again, the comments in paragraph 3.19 as amplification of the exercise are helpful. But the point, and obviously, Leader, there will in fact be a further report, as it were, I presume when the most recent year's statistics are published. But the point that really interests me, sir, is 3.17. You're talking there, for instance, about the top performers, both in relation to local government employees and teachers. And they have a markedly better rate of performance than we have. Now, I would like, if consideration could be given to amplifying in greater detail as part of perhaps the forthcoming report, just exactly why that should be the case. We might be comparing apples with pears. I don't necessarily think that's the case. And as I've already said earlier, sir, we should not be too proud to learn from the best practice elsewhere. So I would hope that that would be taken on board and developed accordingly, Leader.
Can provide member reassurance that a lot of the practice in these high-performing councils in this area is replicated here, but we absolutely will learn from others and adopt those practices. And again, very much happy to inform members of the detail behind that information at a future date.
Councillor Dick. Councillor McComb.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at page 99, the pie chart at the top of the page, a reason for leaving Dumfries and Galloway. Now, I notice almost half of the people leaving, the reason given is simply resignation, 48%. Is there any further information on why these people have resigned?
Corporately, we don't hold information on why people resign. What we ask services to do is that where there's a resignation process in place, then they actually carry out an exit interview with staff so that they can see if there are any issues there that need to be picked up for any future date, but it's not something we hold.
Is there any information on how we compare with the 32 local, with the other 31 local authorities?
No, Chair.
Councillor Lever.
Thank you, Leader. Given that, according to Table 4, almost 50% of our staff are now aged over 50 and the retirement age is increasing very rapidly, would it be possible to have a breakdown of sickness absence by age for each of these departments, which could play a major part in their future decisions? We've got a major problem down here with youth and unemployment. We need to look at whether we're getting best value for money effectively by keeping people working in some of these departments as long as possible.
Chair, once again, happy to provide members with the information that they require, and I'll take notes of this and take it away.
Councillor Dick.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just ask whether, I mean, given that we've, over the last few years, had a number, probably of fairly experienced people leaving under voluntary severance of one sort or another, do we have a corporate succession planning unit, or is it just is it just done by service? Is it just done on a service basis, or do we look at this corporately?
There are two aspects to this. There is a service-led succession plan linked to a workforce plan, a strategy that corporately we oversee. We've actually taken forward that corporate initiative on succession planning recently, and we've had a paper at our corporate business support group supporting the development of that. So in terms of business plans, services will already have embedded within those business plans their aims and their desires and their vision for a succession plan. We are supporting that through our corporate initiative, and you'll very much see more of that coming in the next 12 to 18 months.
There's no other hands up. Can I move to recommendations? We're asked to note 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3. Thank you for that. Move on to item 7 now, which is Audit Scotland Report, Managing Departures from the Scottish Public Sector. The report in front of us. Is there anything to add to the report?
I'm just happy to take questions on the report. Clearly this report actually sets out best practice for authorities and enables authorities to check against their current practice, and that's actually the purpose of the report in front of you. No significant issues have been identified from that process.
Any questions from members? Councillor McComb.
What counselling is provided for employees who are leaving the service?
No counselling per se, but we do actually have courses which are pre-retirement courses which are designed to enable people to depart and look at options of how they plan their retirement. It's a managed process.
Councillor Smith.
Thanks, Leader. One of the questions actually been asked by Councillor Dick in the last report in terms of continuation with future positions, but I mean the report covers what the Audit Scotland report covered, and that's fine. But I think the concerns that were actually raised by members was the fact that this council had undergone obviously a significant reorganisation, and within a few months, frankly, of that reorganisation, lots of people that were reorganised retired. And the question I posed at the last meeting was basically how many people had basically retired within, frankly, a couple of years of being promoted into a senior position in the council. We've had directors that have left for legitimate reasons that have been agreed by full council, but very shortly after they were promoted into that particular post. And the question I posed at the time that this report was agreed to was either we are promoting people into posts who are then leaving very quickly afterwards, and obviously that has an impact on the cost because people's pensions are a lot higher if they're in a promoted post, or we're actually promoting people into a post that frankly can't do the job and then they're leaving rather quickly after they've been put into that particular post. So that was a concern that I raised, to what extent that was happening within the council. So a simple question would be how many people retired within a couple of years of being promoted within the council. So these were the sort of concerns that I had when I raised this issue at the committee, and while the report does indeed refer to the Audit Scotland report and the practice of this council, it doesn't really address that particular concern.
Mr. Clarkin.
Leader, we've actually looked at this and there's no whole-scale indication to us that shortly after management restructures there's been a major impact in terms of pensions. Clearly the pension schemes that are operated are final salaries, so by their very nature they tend to reflect that circumstance. But part of that is the councils need to save vast amounts of money, and clearly that's achieved better through the reduction in the management headcount rather than looking towards the lower levels with the council's commitment towards maintaining frontline services.
You know that how many people effectively have been promoted by the council that have then retired within a couple of years, particularly at a senior level.
So there were no indications that there were actually categories of manager fell into that following our review.
I'll happily provide members with a breakdown of that figure as soon as possible.
Councillor Maitland.
Paragraph 3.19, it just deals with the ranking and talks about us being 5th out of the 32 councils in Scotland in terms of the proportion of staff taking up the option of early release. Is there any particular reason for that? You know, what would be your analysis of why we're 5?
I think we have a higher dependency on retirement because of the age profile within the council, and obviously part of the use of the RVS schemes is to enable the quicker release and the gathering of savings in a relatively short timescale. So we tend to rely on those measures rather than longer term measures.
We do, of course, manage vacancies, and we delete any vacancies as we're going along because we actively manage those vacancies as well. But we find the VRVS system to be a very good tool for achieving savings very quickly.
So you think there'll be a correlation between the age profile of the staff in the other, say, the ones who come above us?
I've no indication of the facts on that, but it would seem that we have a large proportion of our workforce in that 50-plus category, as has already been indicated.
I think what would also be helpful is that we have a very low rate of turnover. In organisational terms, it's almost entropy. It's very difficult to manage with our turnover. As you move towards the central belt, turnover is significantly higher, so it's much easier to manage the workforce and downsizing the workforce with high turnover. And that turnover actually relates right through the council, because particularly as you move towards Glasgow, council officers at middle management move councils on a regular basis because they're able to commute. We don't, and our turnover, I would say, in professional HR terms, is below what is effective for a council to manage, or any organisation to manage. So we have to manage within the constraints of geography. But as we say, when you know, other councils across Scotland, as we see, are taking more radical solutions to manage the workforce, none of which I would support at this time.
Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, Chair, I'm looking at 310, 311, 312, right down to 314, the use of early retirement within the council. I'm looking at 310, where we've had a budget saving of to be made of 27 million, and we've achieved it in various ways and means. And so forth. It then goes on to talk about all employees have had the opportunity to apply for voluntary release. Of the ones, you know, that have applied, notwithstanding the contingency of the service, the savings, and so forth, and indeed the reference made to an early report in terms of age profile and absence and so forth. How many have been accommodated, or are there a number who have not been accommodated, who have applied for an early retirement or package to leave the service, and then there is a backfill, perhaps by young people and so forth? I know I'm not talking about a specific case, but there is one that I'm aware of and have raised it on numerous occasions. And indeed, there are others who make the remark that, well, I'm still waiting on an answer as to whether I am going to be released. Is there a number who have not been accommodated, and what are the reasons for it?
Chair, the main reason for not actually accepting a application for early release is based on the business case doesn't actually work out where there's not sufficient financial savings. We have on quite a number of occasions been able to release on the basis that someone comes in and does the job of the volunteer. And obviously that extends our options as far as taking non-compulsory measures, which we seek to avoid as obviously as an option of last resort. It's fair to say there are a small number of people where it's not been possible to release them because the post needs to remain. There perhaps is no financial saving as well, and there is actually no one else that we could actually put into that job to enable that release, and perhaps on occasions it still would not provide the financial saving that's an ultimate requirement.
Councillor Scobie.
Is it the case, and I hear what Paul's saying, is it the case that there may not be a savings in that department, let it be education, social work or whatever, but by knock-on effect there could be a savings to the council in another department, and effectively or corporately there is still a savings that we can accommodate individuals so that it avoids the need for compulsory redundancy.
Chair, that was actually the case where we've actually been able to release someone else on the basis that someone's come from another department in some cases to do that, and therefore the saving has been made in that other department. So we're open to all options just in terms of enabling volunteers to be released in appropriate circumstances.
Councillor Dick.
Yeah, just following on from the point that Councillor Scobie raised, I'd have thought if you have somebody in a position who wants to go, and we have a redeployment pool, the financial savings are fairly obvious. If somebody, we've got one less member of staff. The main point I wanted to raise escapes me. I've lost my train of thought now.
If you wish,
I'll come back to it.
Right, Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the table at the top of page 110, showing redundancy, that indicates that there has been a significant tailing off in the number of employees being made redundant. Is that accurate, or is that simply, due to the timing of the table, a misrepresentation of the reality just now?
There definitely has been a tailing off, and that reflects the current status within those financial years.
So that the quality of the picture in the table. Thank you.
I think we have to recognise for all members that even regardless of what the press says, the average pension paid to local government employees is very low. And it's not as if, and we know about the unemployment issues within Dumfries and Galloway, so it's not an attractive proposition for someone in their 50s to take early retirement, given the fact that the pension would be, on average, I think, looking to colleagues, it's only about £4,000. So I think we need to recognise that we struck early and took the opportunities of those that were towards the end of their time to move it forward. As we move forward, it's going to be increasingly difficult to encourage staff to take this as a route, given the fact that in the past they probably would have gone on to other employment to subsidise their pension moving forward. So I think it's just to recognise that the big peak came when the first government cuts hit us. But now we have to be cleverer and smarter in working to move on that. But even though people are in their 50s, doesn't mean that they financially are secure, and in many cases could be the sole breadwinner in the family. So that's why it's getting harder to use this as a tool, and that's why we need as much flexibility within the tool. And again, it's redundancy, because the Council's policy is when we move a post is to offer redundancy. That is not offered across other parts of the public sector and local government in Scotland.
Councillor Dick.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. My question actually was in relation to 3.11. I noticed the past tense, all employees have had the opportunity to apply for voluntary release. We're an assurance that all services are making all employees aware they can still volunteer.
Very much so. In fact, there's a corporate refresh of the schemes, and there's actually been a reintroduction of schemes within separate services at the moment. But we're going to actually launch that towards the end of September to reinvigorate and look for bigger numbers to actually come forward for voluntary release.
With that, no other questions. We have the recommendations there. Members are asked to note the existing arrangements, 2.1, etc., and to note that there were no significant issues identified from comparisons with good practice which have not been included within the Council's existing policy and practice. Councillor Smith.
Presumably either in the minutes or otherwise it will be noted that we'll get the details of the figures asked for. I mean, presumably that will go back to the reorganisation, because obviously that was the basis for the question.
Yes, there will be an action from the committee for that.
Sorry, could I just confirm, Councillor Smith, what date he's looking for? Sorry.
Yeah, basically when we had the major reorganisation, it was prior to the Chief Executive joining, obviously when we had the major reorganisation and directors were put into post. From that
so
point
if we go
onwards,
back 5
basically.
years,
Yeah,
is that sufficient?
yeah, I think that's when the reorganisation was. Or the last reorganisation anyway.
With that, move on to item 8, draft protection of vulnerable groups and disclosure scheme policy. Mr. Clanahan.
No further comments to make, Chair, on the report, but it's the introduction of the protection of vulnerable groups, PVG, groups and disclosure scheme policy, and asking members to agree the policy.
Questions? Councillor Dyke.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a slight concern about this. I mean, obviously, the PVG members who sit on education and social work services have to have PVGs, but If something was to come to full council for a decision, for example, how do we stand with that? Because not all 47 members have PVG. And obviously we all have surgeries, we all attend things, we go in and out of schools, and I just wonder what the position is.
Leader, thank you. That's an issue which a number of members have raised with us. My advice from the people who run this scheme is that all members do not require it, only those sitting on specific committees dealing with vulnerable people and children. Now, because of the number of members who've insisted that I'm wrong, I have asked for a legal opinion on the matter, and I will give all members...
insist you were wrong.
I will give members that legal opinion as and when I get it. It's been asked for last week, so it should be here very soon. I don't intend to bring a report to committee. All I intend to do is to write to members telling them what the legal position is. I know that if members wish to substitute or change committees, it does make a difficulty in that you can't just automatically sit on either social work or education committees without being disclosure cleared, but we are addressing that issue. My advice, and clear advice at the moment, is that you cannot just wholesale put 47 members through. You require to have reasons for it, and the fact that you go in and out of school now and again is not a reason for it.
Can I just come back? Is that okay? If there was to be a change on committees, then can somebody tell me the length of time it takes for PVG to come through?
My information, Leader, is that if you determine that you were changing a committee membership and it involved one of the educational social work committees, it would be about 4 weeks. So and I've already been asked the question, what about the embarrassment for a member who maybe doesn't go through the disclosure after being announced as being in a committee? Well, don't tell people that you're making the change until you get the disclosure through. That's the advice that I gave to the leadership the other day when I was asked that very question.
Councillor Smith.
Part of the question's been answered, i.e. why are we not just all put forward for full disclosure? That's been answered already. Although I actually thought that when 2007 first elected, I did have a full disclosure then, but maybe something's changed since then. I wasn't never on social work or education committee. But it did, I mean, we had an issue over the fact we did change the membership from the Labour group on social work committee, and a member was excluded from the last meeting on that basis. But it appears they were excluded on the basis of the exempt items rather than the full agenda. And I just wonder whether or not they would have been entitled to take part in the full agenda without the exempt items, without having full disclosure. And it does come back to the point that if an item is taken from social work to full council, it does cause us real difficulty.
I think there has been a change in legislation. There was disclosure before, but there's now PVG. The other point.
Yeah, absolutely right. The law changed considerably since 2007. In the past, we did just get everybody's disclosure Scotland checked. In fact, many people disclosure checked. We cannot now do that. The law has tightened up. I'm not sure I understand the point, Councillor Smith. Your member was excluded because of an exempt item.
I think that was his interpretation, but I think if you're saying, or you should be hinting at that actually was excluded from sitting on social work full stop, then that obviously does then raise the question. Items from social work do find their way to full council on occasions, and we all sit there and we've actually debated them in the past, items that were on the social work agenda that have been taken as a result of the 12 signatures, and then we've all debated them as a full council, and I don't have disclosure.
I actually checked that situation because it did concern me, and I think it was your good self who raised it, Councillor Smith. What I've been told is that it's the sitting on the committee that will involve you in direct contact with vulnerable groups. If an issue of policy goes forward from social work, or an issue of finance goes forward from social work to full council, they don't view that as requiring to be PVG'd.
Not able to take part in the committee meeting, and they may not be able to have access to certain things with committee, but why can't they take part in the committee meeting in the meantime?
That's the advice we've been given from the PVG organisation, but as I've said, I'm checking the law because of the number of concerns that have been raised by members, and I will give members a full an FAQ based on a legal opinion I'm going to get.
Councillor Carson.
Thanks, Chair. I think all my questions have been answered. It just seems strange, I suppose it's a comment, that a policy or a scheme that's supposed to protect vulnerable people actually excludes people from joining it en masse if there's the potential that we do, because as Councillor Dyke says, in our everyday job as a council, it does put us into contact with vulnerable people, and it seems strange that we're actually excluded legally for some reason.
I think there's a number of councils across Scotland who would not want to be disclosure checked. But also I think there is human rights comes into the fact that forcing everybody to have police checks is also against the law. So I think there's a balance, and this is where we need the council's view to walk that difficult line between requiring all members of the public to get disclosure checked and councillors and members of the public just because you hold a post. And in your contact, you're not expected to have the direct contact with schools and individual children more than the duty doesn't carry any more than others. That's what we need to check. But certainly, having sat in many of these debates, the problem with the first Disclosure Scotland checks was they were all embracing, and in fact they applied to jobs as well. And the guidance we've had is that is illegal to do a blanket check of everyone. You have to have good reason to check someone. So we'll clarify and get out to members. But yes, there are a number of human rights issues wrapped up that weren't considered when this law was brought in, and they should have been considered at that point.
Just on the back of that point, how we would do in retrospective ones as well. Are they just for specific posts rather than, I think it's 3.4 that says it's retrospectively for the members of staff, which I believe this is about, rather than council members?
That's correct, Chair. In terms of retrospective checking, we have managers within services at present assessing posts that would come under the definition of regulated work, and it's a more specific definition as was previously under enhanced disclosure. Once we have that list, those will be the identified posts, and therefore the post holders who will then be retrospectively checked for PVG.
Councillor Geddes.
Thanks, Leader. Obviously, I wouldn't want to try and anticipate, the results of Council's opinion, but Mr. Haswell made a couple of statements earlier on there which really did interest me. And the first one would be, could it not be argued that, to PVG proof, for want of a better term, the whole cohort of 47, it could be argued that would result in a more effective and more efficient, functioning of Dumfries and Galloway Council. And the other one, of course, he was talking about advice he'd got from those who operate the PVG scheme. Well, I would merely say, in relation to that, Mr. Haswell, views perhaps of mere civil servants. I'll not say any more.
Can I say, in response to Councillor Geddes, yeah, we did suggest it would be administratively convenient for the council. I was told that the system had not been set up for the administrative convenience of the Dumfries and Galloway Council. So I've tried that one, and yes, it was a mere civil servant.
Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's a degree of common sense has got to be used in this as well. I think I've no problem with the PVG system and that. But when a councillor is barred from actually attending a committee meeting, I think there has got to be a degree of common sense in this, because if you read that, and if you read what it actually says, it's regular working with children or protected adults. There's, people have got an enhanced disclosure, at the moment, and no problem going on with the other ones, but you're not actually in regular contact with children or vulnerable adults. You're in a committee situation, so you're not actually in contact with anybody like that. So I think a degree of common sense could have been used within that. Just on the PVG itself and the costs to the council, is a cost. I know for example, my wife, she works in the NHS. She's now going through managing a PVGs for all the staff and that as well as herself, but they have to pay for it. My wife has to pay for her own.
Chair, there's different practice across Scotland. We certainly benchmarked other councils across Scotland to see what their practice was. Some councils ask employees to fund that upfront cost themselves, others go somewhere in between, and there was a significant proportion that continued to fund that from a council perspective. Corporate management team, when presented with that information, decided that that would be the decision to continue to pay for the PVG membership for new employees.
Just in the cost.
The cost in itself is £59 per PVG scheme record, and based on our figures over the past couple of years, it's about £102,000 a year.
Councillor Nicholl.
What made me draw my cheeks in? 102,000, £59 per person. Is that inclusive? If you were on education and on, does the one and on social work, does the one PVG do you? That's my first question. Second question is, maybe to Mr. Haswell actually, does it apply to members of the Employment and Appeals Committee? Because we do get people coming in front of Employment and Appeals who could be classed as vulnerable in some cases.
Chair, I think the specifics at the moment are education and social work services, my understanding of that.
Just with regard to the funding of 102,000, is that including retrospective ones for people who are already in post, or is that just new people coming to the organisation?
The figures that we have, we previously disclosure checked 1,700, and an assessment was made on that basis going forward. There was an increase in cost from the previous disclosure check or enhanced disclosure check to a PVG scheme record. That's something that's embedded within the statutory regulation. We have no option but obviously to pay the charges on that. A PVG scheme record lasts for the lifetime of the person.
So take it from that, future years, as we're getting fewer people going through, new employees coming on, it would be reduced. Right. Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, Chair, I don't know if anybody else is wondering here or trying to come to grips with this, but why would you need a PVG? And many of the points have been made in terms of you're not coming into direct contact by sitting on the social work and the education committee. Why would you need a PVG if you're not coming into direct contact to sit on these two committees? Yet we've heard it said, and it's undisputably the case, that we're meeting with vulnerable people every day. That's 47. Yet it's only those that sit on social work and education that require that. We are as vulnerable in our day-to-day duties as it would be in sitting on deliberating and never coming into contact through education and social work. Can somebody give me a rational explanation as to why it's necessary on these two, notwithstanding that there are vulnerable people within both and children in education? That's the case. But why is it necessary?
I'll try and give Councillor Scobie a logical explanation. When you are a member of the Education and Social Work Committee, and he'll recall the need to know in terms of the Wednesbury principles, you have the right to get certain information about certain individuals. That information is not freely available, but you get it as a member of that committee. You may ask it as a member of the council, but he knows full well that I quite regularly say to him, no, I'm sorry, you're not entitled to that information. The view has been taken, and the logic behind it is that when you're a member of social work and education, you, as a matter of course and as a matter of the council, through the corporate council, will get information regarding children and vulnerable adults, which would not otherwise be freely available to you. If you as a councillor are meeting vulnerable people, you're meeting them while you're wearing your councillor's hat, you're still just a member of the public. I'm sorry, I've gone into this in some depth. I'd much prefer, I can't answer members' questions in detail today, but I have undertaken and I've said I'm getting a council's opinion, and I will produce a document which hopefully will answer all the questions the members have. Councillor Carson made the point, the law is not always logical.
Is that perhaps another way of saying the law's an arse, Chair? However, you know, Mr. Haswell makes reference to that at times he has advised that you're not entitled to that. There are also other occasions when the individual is entitled and receives it. So, it's a bit one-sided in trying to make that as an argument. I am not suggesting anything. What I am saying is that as a member, then you come into possession of information, yet without a PVG. From his explanation, there is very little rationale behind, and has whispered in my ear, it's the law. And that may be the case, it's the law, but the law, I'm asking how 47 members do not need it, it's only those that sit on, and I would like to see that part of the law that says it's only social work and education that require that.
And as I said to Councillor Scobie, I've already queried that, and I'll bring a QC's opinion. It may very well be, and the law's always double-edged, it may very well be that this new piece of legislation cuts across your right to know certain things as a councillor. So, when the opinion comes back, it may be a double-edged sword. I've asked the questions. I will come back to members. I can't answer these kind of questions. I don't have the knowledge. I don't have the information.
Councillor Dykes.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I look forward to hearing what the QC's opinion is, and I'm presuming that Mr Haswell has given examples. Obviously, most of the councillors in this room probably do home visits, where we may be visiting a vulnerable family. I certainly am not doing that as a member of the public. I'm doing that in my capacity as a councillor. And I'm presuming that these are kind of examples have been given, and I look forward to the QC's comments.
From my understanding, Mr Haswell will be able to give you the legal opinion in a written document and try and answer the questions that came forward in a common sense, hopefully, answer. Right. Right. With that, Mr Haswell has taken an undertaking to come back to us on that one. We're asked to consider and approve the Council's draft protection of vulnerable groups and disclosure policy scheme policy appendix. I'm happy to agree that. Take no dissent as agreement. For that, we'll now move on to item 9, lease of former Glenzier Primary School, conditions of lease. Mr Haswell, is there any updates on this one?
Yes, I'm afraid, well, not afraid to say, but Leader, I would like to update members on this. There was a slight misunderstanding of the information that we got from Lochinvar. Lochinvar do not yet have SEPA approval for drilling the 3 holes that they intend to drill on Glenzier Primary School. Their problem is that they cannot approach SEPA for the licence necessary until they actually lease the ground. So, following a further discussion and negotiations with Lochinvar, we think we have a condition which will meet the objective of the original condition 1, and I've asked members to consider taking this today. This information only came to light yesterday, and I understand a number of members will have had phone calls last night from representatives or a representative of Lochinvar. Condition 2 has been met. In terms of condition 1, we're suggesting that the recommendation would be that the objective of condition 1 will be met as part of the licensing conditions by SEPA. It will be a condition of the lease that the appropriate licence will be obtained before drilling commences. It achieves the same end, but SEPA will not go in and do the environmental assessment until such time as they know that Lochinvar can actually drill in the ground. To drill in the ground, they require this lease. So that's a minor change. It's really on the basis of a technicality, but I want to make sure members are fully aware of what we're doing and what the council would be doing in relation to this issue.
With that, is there any questions?
Okay, thanks, Leader. The recommendation is that the objective of condition 1 has been met. That's what's in the recommendation. That's what I'm asking.
I've asked for condition 2.1 to be, recommendation 2.1 to be deleted and the following to be put in, that the objective of condition 1 will be met as part of the licensing conditions by SEPA. They have the expertise to do the environmental assessments, etc. We don't in-house within the council. And the second part to that is, it will be a condition of the lease that the appropriate licence will be obtained before drilling commences. So they enter into the lease, they go to SEPA, they get the permissions from SEPA, then they can drill. They are taking the risk that SEPA may say no, rather than the other way around.
We agree with amended. Move on to item 10, appointment to outside bodies, Dumfries Prison Visiting Committee. So Haswell, anything to add to the report?
Nothing to add other than to say, without putting Councillor Scobie behind the 8 ball, he's volunteered, I think.
For that, I get a PVG or end up back in the jail.
I also had 2 expressions of interest, from one from Councillor Witch, who isn't on the committee, but I note that's not an issue, and Councillor Dykes has intimated she would be willing to volunteer. Unless there's any other volunteers, we can.
I'm quite happy not to participate. If anybody else would like to take up that position, I would be more than happy with that.
No, a willing volunteer's a lot better than a pressed man. Thank you for that.
Yep, just confirm decision to appoint Councillor Scobie, Dykes and Witts to the Prison Visiting Committee in Dumfries. Thank you, Leader.
Move. Move on to item 11, appointment to outside bodies area support team. Councillor Maitland.
Leader, I'd like to suggest that Councillor Brody is appointed to this particular area support team, please. He's volunteered.
I know in the past that he was a member of the children's panel, and he's willing. I think that should be something we can accept. Move on to item 12. Mr. Green, this is 92 to 102 High Street, Dumfries. Mr. Green to take us through the report if required, if there's any additional information or any updates.
Thank you, Leader. Just to say, this is the follow-up to the report that members requested further information in more detail from the previous committee. And just to highlight to members that the report itself, I believe, does provide the business case that was asked for previously. And I would draw your attention to section 3.15, 3.16, and then 4.3 of the report, which I think gives detail on the project and the benefits that would accrue for the town centre in moving things forward. I have to answer any questions.
Any questions from members? Mr. Smith?
I mean, the business plan's obviously there now, and that was missing from the last report, or rather the business plan that was in the last report, frankly, didn't add up. But I've got concerns over the actual funding arrangements that you're proposing to actually put in place for this. I mean, the first point to raise is obviously there's a suggestion here that a substantial sum of money from the DDA budget, in the region of £32,000 from the council, should go towards the work in this building. Now, we all receive letters from other organisations that have also put in requests for funding from the DDA budget, and those requests are not contained within the paper. No commitment was made that there would be a wider paper on the funding for DDA work, and that's not on the table today. So my concern is that we agree to fund one organisation from this particular budget, and then we get a report several weeks' time saying, well, actually the budget's run out, so the other organisations can't get any funding, that there's an element of favouritism here. This organisation's come forward, and what we really should have had was a wider report on the use of the DDA budget. and that's not contained here. So I don't know what the full DDA budget is. I don't know what the demands are on that budget. I don't know what other organisations have actually put in for funds from that particular budget, and I would like to see that information before I agree to hand over funding from this particular budget. I'm also concerned over the funding is coming from the economic development budget of PH&E. I'm not aware of PH&E ever even having discussed this yet, but it seems to be that this committee here seems to be taking a decision on behalf of another committee, and I'm concerned at that. I'm concerned that we have already got a commission for the arts in this area in the region of £210,000 a year, and I raised it under the previous report that I have still no idea how that money is actually spent. It seems to be exempt from the department's review of culture in the area. So on the one hand, what we're saying is that this committee is reviewing the budget for culture and we're going to make savings in that budget. However, at the same time we're doing that, so that will mean cuts in council services. At the same time we're doing that, somehow we can find more money for more commissions for outside organisations. I'm concerned about that. An extra, not only are we asking for £32,000 from the DDA budget, £49,000 from the economic development budget, we're then asking for a further £20,000 a year over 3 years for a commission. The actual agreement with which I have absolutely no idea what we're commissioning. So I've got serious concerns about the funding package being put in place here. And I've also got the further concern that as a council we're constantly driving to try to reduce the number of buildings we've got, and we're taking on board yet another building. Now I fully appreciate that this is a situation that is not in the making entirely by the council. The Chamber of Commerce have obviously taken on a project and not fully completed that particular project, despite spending huge sums of money on it, I have to say. But I'm really concerned about the funding mechanisms that are being put in place and the impact on other worthwhile organisations that are also seeking funds from the council that are not contained within this report today.
Certainly, just in response to some of the questions on funding, certainly members of this committee requested that we consider funding from the DDA compliance budget to bring forward into this report. That's an action that came out of the previous report in June. Funding has been agreed through PH&E for the contribution this year to the project, and certainly the principle of going forward with a 3-year commission, I think can easily be contained within the economic development service budget moving forward, and I feel that'd be an operational level decision to make. I think it's clear that if we want this to move forward, we need to underpin the next 3 years of the project. I think the outputs are there, not just for arts-related activity, but for town centre regeneration. Fully appreciate that it's an unusual situation, particularly given the process we're going through as a council to reduce our estate. But on this occasion, I feel that what I've put forward is the only way that we'll be able, as a region, to bring this project forward.
I mean, it was certainly raised that given that it was DDA works, that the DDA budget would be one of the areas that would look for funding, but the point remains, why is this bid on the table effectively today, but other bids from other organisations for funding is not? I mean, you know, where is the wider DDA budget? I've never had a report on that's going to be spent on for some time now. So I raise the concern again that one organisation effectively gets favouritism from that budget, and surely they should all be on the table at the same time if there are other bids out there.
I'm sure if you would have that information of the property section.
My response would be that we're bringing forward a project here, and that in coming to determine the funding or the opportunity for bringing funding forward, it's been fully consulted with colleagues in property services and the head of finance, who agree there is funding available to bring forward to this project.
Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Chair. I also have concerns that, and Councillor Smith voiced them about the funding. I also have concerns about taking ownership of our building again. I don't know, maybe Alex can give us a wee steer here as well. I mean, as far as I was aware, it was council policy of not taking ownership of properties for which it has no use, as a council. And another aspect of that is if that fails, if that organisation fails, we will be left with the ownership of another shop, an empty shop, which we have no use for. So on the the policy of the council, I don't think we have the policy is we don't take ownership of buildings we have no use of, and we can clear that up.
Certainly, the council's policy is to have fewer and better buildings, and that's the policy that we've been adopting. If you've no use for a building, you should not take ownership of it.
Councillor Dick.
Thanks, Chair. Having read through this quite carefully, it seems to me to be a very worthwhile, quite an exciting regeneration project, which I would support. Can I just ask what happens to the 60,000 that was given by the Scottish Government if it didn't go ahead? Please.
Well, that funding would come back to the council, as the council is financially responsible for the project, and then discussion with Scottish Government around what would happen to that funding. The funding is ring-fenced to meet the terms and conditions of the Scottish Government grant, so we'd have to, in effect, offer that back to Government unless we had another alternative use or proposal.
Councillor Lever.
Can I just come back to Councillor Smith's question? How much is in the DDA budget? The head of finances here, perhaps he can answer that.
I've not got the exact figure here. It was a 5-year programme, the DDA programme, and there was an amount carried forward into the current financial year that became part of the non-schools property asset class. We'd intended to actually bring a report on that to this meeting, but it'll actually come to the next meeting in terms of the allocations to that overall class. It was approved, the programme was approved by the March meeting of this committee, but I can't remember the exact figure for DDA, but I can certainly get that to members today.
Councillor Geddes.
Well, I would have to say, Leader, that like Councillor Dick, I'm basically supportive of this project. I think it's potentially, it will have a worthwhile effect and benefit, not only per se, but if you look at paragraph, the sub-paragraph in the report under the side heading of Nithsdale Arts Hub, and again, the last sentence there, the proposals to develop the scope contribute to the realisation of this arts plan action. Like Councillor Dick, I've been through the report in detail, and as I say, I feel in fact that it's not entirely without issues of concern for me. I've got to be honest and say that. And I know that certain colleagues who are not on this committee, for instance, felt that maybe we're being a wee bit overly generous, offering, albeit a full repairing and maintenance lease for a period of 7 years, in the first instance, for a peppercorn rent of £1 per annum. There were certain colleagues felt, in fact, that should maybe be reduced somewhat. But, I'd be interested to hear, in fact, if any colleagues around the table today have any views to express on that one. But I think from a conceptual point of view, basically, yesterday in our own group, it was in fact that we were very much in favour of it, and that happens to be my own view as well. I'm not here as a mouthpiece leader for anyone else, but by the same token, I am thrilled to the concept of this, and I agree with Councillor Dick in that regard.
Councillor Lever.
It's just obviously the figure for the DDA budget is there. I'd much rather have that figure in front of us before we make a decision on that. We do know there are other bids in for that budget. This is being taken in isolation at the moment.
Members are looking for that information. If we could continue this item for 20 minutes. Unfortunately, Paul and Gillian are needed for the next items. We'll make a phone call and we'll come back with that information if that's what members require.
That include all the bids that are on the table and the use of that fund, because the concern that I raise is certainly that we allocate this funding from DDA budget today. We then get the report that was supposed to come today, but we're being told has been delayed until next month, that then tells us there's no funding for these other organisations. So that's the concern that I have, and telling us just what the figure is doesn't necessarily tell us what the demand on that figure is.
We'll try and get you both. My suspicion is that the demand on that figure, because the finance have agreed to allocate that money could be used that way, my suspicion is that there's a projected fairly major underspend on the DDA budget. But could members bear with us and we'll come back with that information within the next 20 minutes or so?
Dick.
Could I just clarify that with the DDA funding allocation was made unconditionally? Is that correct? That was agreed. And my understanding too is that there is quite a substantial underspend on the DDA fund. But if I could just ask for clarification on that, it wasn't conditional.
I'm just not sure what you mean by conditional.
Well, in other words, we didn't agree to allocate the £32,500 dependent on what else was in the fund or what other applications were in. We agreed to let finance allocate that to this project.
Yes, and on the basis of a requirement to improve the building, and also on the basis that by doing so, we will draw the project will draw down significant external funding from other sources.
Councillor McGregor.
Thank you, Chair. We've obviously deferred this report before, and the DDA wasn't a massive issue at the last particular meeting. It was more about the business plan and the finances. So, you know, the DDA for me is a bit of a non-issue, and I don't really see why we're even considering it in the round with other applications. It would be a bit like saying, well, we can't consider that area grant application until we've seen, you know, what other applications are going to come within the rest of the year. We have to look at this report here today. Money's already been allocated in principle. It would be useful to know what the figure of the fund is, but I don't think it should influence today's decision.
Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, Chair, it's difficult not to support, you know, what looks like an exciting project, and it's one that's not dissimilar to one that came forward in Stranraer, and at that particular time it was said that, you know, in the discussions I had with the executive team, that they perhaps didn't want to purchase another building, you know, so it was left to the friends of the particular project to try and take it forward in Stranraer. But, you know, that's what we're dealing with the showcase of the stove in Dumfries, so it's difficult not to support the excitement, but there is a point being made in terms of other competing interests against any funds. I think it's important we look at that as well.
Councillor McClung.
Yeah, thanks, Leader. I'm just going to echo Councillor Geddes' support for it and also his reservations regarding the rental rate. Just a couple of things. Can I clarify who actually owns the building at the minute? And if it comes to the council, how much are we going to have to pay for it? From my reading, we get it for nothing. And also, I find it rather strange that when you look at page 168 of 208, the achievement programmes for the 2012, I find it somewhat concerning that Dumfries members are actually complaining about something whose achievements appear to be all in Dumfries and very little in Wigtonshire. Yet you have members from the other side that are actually supporting it.
Right. We have had a procedural point whereby information is coming in the next 20 minutes or thereabout. Oh, it's here now. Oh, got it now, so we can have that.
Yeah, the amount carried forward for DDA compliance works in the non-schools property asset class is £373,000 this year. Other than this bid, the only other bids we're aware of are from the education service, but they're not going to use up the full amount that's available.
That's not the only bids that members are aware of. We've received a letter from an organisation that has emails from officers of this council promising a report today on DDA budgets that hasn't happened. So, I mean, Councillor McGregor says, why is it relevant? Well, it's relevant because officers of this council made commitments to an outside organisation that haven't been fulfilled. So that's why it's relevant, and that's why I raise it. I expected to see this report on DDA budgets today, because that was the commitment given. So I think it is relevant. Do we know how much effectively the bids from education actually are?
They're more significant. They're up to £300,000. We're looking at the detail of that at the minute, but up to £300,000.
But absolutely sure, therefore, as well as this organisation I've highlighted, which I think all members have received letters from, which actually also, for Councillor McClung's benefit, covers Dumfries as well. There are no other organisations seeking any funding whatsoever from this particular fund.
Certainly not that I'm aware of. I wasn't aware of the particular example you've referred to there, but the only bids that we're aware of at the minute is this one that's on the table today, plus the bids from Education Service.
With that information, see, have recommendations in item 12. Councillor Smith.
I would suggest that we defer it until we actually have a report on all the bids for the DDA funding. That we're reassured. I think Paul's made the point he wasn't aware of the bid that we're aware of, certainly in the emails from officers making a commitment to have a report today on DDA funding. So I think we should receive that information.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to second that. As well as, you know, I've got great concerns over the viability of the business case within this report and whether it's going to be viable and whether the council's going to be left with the responsibilities, again, for something that, you know, that is not in the policy of the council to take on.
Councillor Dick.
I would move the recommendations, and maybe, given the concerns expressed about the length of time, I think it was 7 years, we perhaps review in 3.
Councillor Geddes.
There's a procedural issue to be determined first, sir. I would move, in fact, that we determine this application today.
Mr. Crichton.
Thank you, Chairman. First decision of the committee is to determine whether or not you wish to discuss item 12 and take a decision today in relation to this item. The motion from Councillor Smith, seconded by Councillor Nicholson, is in effect to defer the item. Councillor Dick is moving, I understand, the opposite. Seconder.
Just to say, given the procedural matter,
just procedural first, yeah.
I've seconded Councillor Geddes on that, and we'll deal with the
sorry, yes,
the
thank
issue
you.
after that.
Yep, thank you.
If we have one to defer and one to actually proceed, which was to actually adopt the recommendation, can we just have clarification? Is it the procedural one first, or?
Clarification from my perspective. My amendment is purely a procedural amendment. It is to determine the application today. I made no further statement. Determine the application today.
Okay, on that basis, members, the motion from Councillor Smith, seconded by Councillor Nicholson, is in effect to defer the item to enable the full details of the DDA budget information, as well as clarity on the Council's policy in relation to ownership. And the amendment by Councillor Geddes, seconded by Councillor Dick, is to in effect determine the matter today. Members all happy with the terms of the motion and the amendment? Go to the vote. Councillor Hislop.
Amendment.
Councillor Dick.
Amendment.
Councillor Geddes. Councillor Lever. Councillor McGregor.
Amendment.
Councillor McCautry. Councillor McClung.
Amendment.
Councillor McComb.
Amendment.
Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Nicholl.
Amendment.
Councillor Scobie. Councillor Smith. Decision of the committee, 8 votes to 3, is for the amendment to determine the item today. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Dick.
On that basis, Chair, could I move the recommendations, and if members accept it, to reduce the review period from 7 to 3 years, in line with the concerns that were expressed earlier on.
Councillor Smith.
Pointless previous vote, but I'll move the question the procedure there. But I would move that we don't agree this on the basis that we do not have sufficient information on the demands on the DDA budget of the council.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to second that, and if we can get information on council taking ownership of the building for which it has no use. If that's included in that.
Basis of the motion from Councillor Dick, seconded by Councillor McGregor, is in effect to agree the recommendations with the addition that will be reviewed after 3 years rather than 7. The amendment by Councillor Smith, seconded by Councillor Nicholson, is to not proceed on the basis of there being insufficient information in relation to the DDA, as well as the need for more clarity in relation to the Council's policy in relation to asset ownership. Members happy to go to the vote. Councillor Hislop.
Motion.
Councillor Carruthers, not here. Councillor Carson, not here. Councillor Dick.
Motion.
Councillor Geddes. Councillor Lever. Councillor McGregor.
Motion.
Councillor McCautry.
Amendment.
Councillor McClung.
Motion.
Councillor McComb.
Motion.
Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Nicholl.
Motion.
Councillor Scobie. Councillor Smith. Decision of the committee is to agree the motion from Councillor Dick, in effect to agree the recommendations with the one amendment in relation to the review term for the lease.
Thank you for that. Move on to item 13, Council Revenue Budget Monitoring 2013-14 for the period ended 30th of June. Gillian, are you taking us through this? Is there anything you wish to add to the report? I'm happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Sally. I'll just provide a quick summary of the main aspects of the report.
We'll maybe just wait and the other members coming back. If they are in the members' lounge. I think that's everyone back now, Gillian.
Thank you. This is the first Corporate Monitoring Report of 2013-14, reporting the position for the end of June. The key elements in the report are that although a number of service departments have identified some potential early pressures, particularly within social work, education and P&E, it's anticipated that the implementation of tight spending controls and active budget management will seek to ensure that that spending is contained within the allocated budgets. The report also seeks agreement to the allocation of $486,000 from the Budget Pressure Fund, and as recommended by the Social Work Committee on the 20th of June, as part of the measures required to bring the budget into the current balance and address the impact of increases in nationally agreed contracts. As noted at section 6.3 of the report, funding of $900,000 is anticipated to be released by the end of the financial year through projected underspending on loan charges and the release of temporary funding from the Teachers' Refresh Scheme. A review of the Council's policy and general fund balances and the previous approach of transferring additional funding to the Corporate Change Fund is currently being reviewed and will be carried out. It will be reported to the next meeting of this committee. A summary of the current progress on the 2013-14 agreed savings and the policy development allocations is provided in appendices 3 and 4 at the back of the report. Areas of significant uncertainty regarding deliverability is highlighted at section 7.2, and progress on the update on the deliverability of these savings plus the other savings will be reported to the respective service committees, and including details of any compensating measures that services may wish to carry out to ensure that they don't return and overspend at the end of the year. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Smith.
There's obviously a number of issues within the budget and the appendixes in relation to the savings and also the policy development funding. And what concerns me is that these are all issues the Labour Group flagged up to the administration when you were preparing your budget, were roundly ignored when it came to raising those particular issues, but the reality have been proved to be correct. The first one was obviously in relation to welfare rights, and we expressed a concern this organisation had basically been effectively plucked up with the air to receive a £120,000 funding cut, and we had concerns over the fact that they had never been notified of that particular cut. and if you look at the figures today, it proved we were correct. They weren't notified. They took a complaint against the council, and as a result of that, it cost this council £20,000 to give them the notice that, frankly, they should have been given in the first place. And I just wish that those concerns were heard at the actual time. The other concern that we had, and we've raised since then, was in relation to the budget template for community facilities review. We were kind of told that, well, if you just hand authority to officers to come up with answers to that, it will speed the process up. We were clearly sceptical about that because, frankly, my view is these decisions should be made by councillors that are elected to do so, and it does mean tough decisions, but frankly that's what they were elected to do. And if you look at the figure in the savings tracker for community facilities review, we were told that would save £200,000 in administration's budget, and the reality is it's only actually going to save £87,000. So can we get a commitment from the administration that we won't pursue the budget again in a way that simply says we'll agree a figure but not bother actually telling you where the savings are going to come from? We need that information up front so we're absolutely clear where the savings are coming from, not this sort of random guess that we appear to have when it came to the community facilities review. We still don't know exactly what the breakdown of savings are in relation to that review, or for that matter the integration of libraries. We've got the list now of possible closures, though a lot of them don't look like closures, but we don't actually know what the financial breakdown is of that. This is a committee that's supposed to oversee that department, but we don't actually get reports on that particular work. And likewise, the same as in relation to adult learning services. £150,000 has been saved there. I could ask the leader today, could he tell me where those savings have been made? And if you don't know the answer, leader, then that shows that we should not be making decisions based on making a cut in a budget without actually being absolutely clear where that particular savings is going to be made. So I think there are a lot of issues there that were raised when it came to the budget setting process. And the final issue that was raised during the budget setting process is in relation to policy development funding. The Labour group expressed a concern that the administration were setting aside £600,000 for support for businesses in this financial year, even although that funding was over 2 financial years, £300,000 this year and £300,000 the following year. We asked specific questions about that at PH&E. The specific answer the leader and the chair of PH&E gave was the reason you were allocating £600,000 is just in case you actually overspent the £300,000 this financial year and you were able to bring that funding forward for support to local businesses. Now, we politely pointed out, if you seriously thought that was going to happen, you were living in cloud cuckoo land, because you're not going to allocate that level of funding for a new project and get it up and running and actually overspending it in the 1 year. And if you look at Appendix 4, you'll see that that's actually turned out to be the case. So far, that £300,000 for this financial year is not going to be spent during this financial year. Only £200,000 is actually going to be spent. So you've now got £400,000 basically sitting in the council's bank for a project that, frankly, you were told at the time would not happen during this financial year. So you made £300,000 worth of cuts in services to fund something that, frankly, you weren't actually going to fund in this financial year. And I think that's the wrong decision to make, and we warned about that at the time. And frankly, I think that people are owed an apology for the fact that they were told, frankly, you would overspend that fund and you needed that money, when the reality, as the report today tells us, that certainly wasn't the case. And the final issue is in relation to civic pride funding. It talks about the £100,000 being set aside for the burial service and the £100,000 being set aside for community commissioning. We're now into September. The budget was agreed in February. The draft budget was set out in December, and we still haven't a clue where that money's being spent. There hasn't been a single report to a single area committee highlighting what they're being asked to do when it comes to community commissioning. I'd quite like to know exactly when that report is actually going to come. Final point I'd make is, again, in relation to social services. We've got a request today to bail out social services again. And what I'm concerned about as we move towards the budget setting process for next year, I still have absolutely no idea what the base budget is for social services. Every other department's been asked to make savings. Social services staff are working hard to try to bring the budget under control, but the reality is we still haven't a clue what we spend money in social services on. We had yet another overspend at the last meeting of social service in relation to kinship care. How that wasn't spotted the month before when the budget was agreed, I don't know. But we're constantly being asked and given information at this committee about social services, and we're not being given a full report detailing exactly when we think the social services budget will be brought under control, what that means for next year's budget setting process. Because the department appears to be exempt from any consideration to the budget next year. We're just simply being told to sit and wait
until we've actually got the final figure. So I think this committee needs a detailed report on where we are in relation to social services budget and what the impact is going to be on next year's budget. I mean, it may very well be that the conclusion we make is that we actually do not fund social services to the full amount that we should actually fund social services. Frankly, I can't answer that question at the moment because I'm basically being told that we don't really know what we're spending money on in social services at the moment.
Social work one. Got it.
Thank you, Chair. I think first point out that the amount that's been requested in this report to allocate to the social work budget is the one that we discussed at this committee in June. It was agreed that the social work committee on the morning and the Policy Resources Committee discussed it in the afternoon, but the actual formal agreement's coming forward through today's papers. In terms of getting a handle on the social work budget, I mean, we took a very detailed report to the Social Work Committee on the 20th of June, which set out our estimates in terms of projected spend for social work for the current financial year. And that included a range of measures to ensure that the social work budget was returned to a balanced position as quickly as possible. Those measures included the additional funding we're talking about today, some specific savings options that have now been progressed by the social work management team, and also a review of some of the policies within social work. One of the points I think is important to clarify is that social work absolutely are not exempt from the budget process. I appreciate where the concern comes from, because as part of last year's budget process, it wasn't any real great detailed consideration of social work budget because we're undertaking the exercise at this stage. For this year, it's fully intended that, same as any other service department, budget pressures, issues regarding demographics, and also savings options will be presented to members as part of the budget development process. So I can just assure members that there's no exemption for social work this year.
Yeah, I mean, in relation to social work, you know, the point was made that the report that was taken in June, and I read that report. I wouldn't regard it as being thorough in terms of the savings options. It was quite brief in terms of those particular options. But the question remains, it did not clarify exactly what the base budget of social work was. Just before that, members of Social Work Committee agreed a budget for the year ahead. Within days of that budget being agreed, the budget pressure of kinship care was highlighted, yet for some reason that wasn't spotted when the actual budget was presented about a month before for members of the social work. My fear is, if that wasn't spotted, then what other pressures are going to be spotted in 3 months' time, 4 months' time? Who knows what's going to happen? If the budget agreed by a committee falls apart within a month, then what's going to happen in 6 months' time? So I'm not reassured that all the budget lines that were contained within that social work budget that was agreed by the committee are actually accurate. I really don't have any reassurance that we've got to the bottom of that. So do we know exactly what we regard as the base budget for social work actually is?
The base budget for social work is as reported to the 20th of June's meeting of the Social Work Committee. As with any other service department, there are estimates, there are issues that may arise during the course of the year, which both the service management team and ourselves corporately need to consider and manage. But that is the base budget from which we're working from going forward, and that's the base budget from which we'll consider any pressures and savings coming from the social work service as part of the development of the upcoming budget process.
Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, Chair, just on social work, the point was made there at the Social Work Committee that this is a needs-led budget, and I did make the point that I did not feel that the budget set as in February 2013, that it reflected indeed that needs-led service that was required in reflection of the budget set. I think it is contained in 4.4 in the last paragraph. It is important in terms of the corporate finance management to recognise the risk that the full savings required to balance the social work budget might not be fully achieved. And we got the assurance from the chief social worker that he would be reviewing the budget and indeed would come back and give us warts and all in terms of the service that's being delivered. And it may be that the budget is not able to be brought into line because of some of these needs-led budget, and and I would not like for the council, having set its budget, not to deliver the services that is required out there by the people. One of the references made was kinship carers, and indeed it was well known exactly that kinship carers were or is continually on the increase, and not to respond to kinship carers would have a catastrophic effect on the council through other services if kinship carers were not looking after the children that are affected by whatever social circumstances. In that respect, Chair, we have it before us today where we're being asked in social work terms to look at, again, an overspend and to mitigate those circumstances. So, that's the situation, and I think we have to seriously look what is being referred to as the budget and on setting that budget. I have a great deal of empathy for what Councillor Smith is saying in terms of customer and community services, and again, that has been well canvassed in terms of the savings that was projected, and indeed the issue in Stranraer of the premises that we vacated and now find ourselves having to put back, if you like, where it does not appear that there has been any kind of savings in that field. So there are issues in here that has been flagged up by members in terms not only of the consultation, but the anticipated savings, where it seems to be coming back at 87 and not the 200 and odd thousand that was projected in the budget. And it's to what we did not know is the concern that we have as the non-aligned group.
Councillor Maitland.
I hesitate almost to say it, but actually, since receiving the reports in June and in August, I cautiously begin to believe that actually social work is beginning to be got under control. I do believe that, very slowly. I certainly look forward to the Chief Social Worker's annual report, which we are due to receive in November. But if you look at reports number 5 and 6 in the August committee papers, I think you'll see very clearly what is being decided. And I think also we should take heart from the unanimity of the Social Work Committee in taking that forward. There was no dissent. Leader, I want to pick up on a couple of issues in respect of the savings tracker, and in light of social work problems, perhaps they look like small beer, but I think there's a principle here. When members say they want to achieve a saving in a particular way, that's the way they want to achieve it. They don't want it to come forward in some other way that has been found. There is an issue there with respect to the Parks and Gardens disposal costs and the non-school property rationalisation, both of which look as if they are not totally on track. And I would like reassurance that what members have agreed will happen. So if I can have that assurance, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. On the savings tracker itself, the whole purpose of that is, just as Councillor Maitland has said, to try and ensure that members are aware that where they've agreed a saving, it's delivered in the manner they expected. Maybe one point to identify is that we're actually projected here that 97% of the total savings will be achieved in that manner. Obviously, we'd like to get it higher up and closer to 100%, but I think it's important members recognise that 97% are being progressed in the manner agreed. In terms of the two Councillor Maitland highlighted, what we're really reflecting in here is a delay in the achievement of the saving rather than the saving not being achieved in full. So there's compensating measures being taken by relevant service departments in the current year to avoid an overspend. We're still expecting the full saving to be delivered on an ongoing basis after this current financial year.
Councillor Dick.
I appreciate that reassurance as well. As long as I've been in this council, one of the problems had been with social work that we really didn't know how much the services that we were providing cost. And I think that changed in the last Social Services Committee of the last council. Once that external auditor began the work of analysing the financial problems in there, we started to go down the track of working out exactly what our services cost. And it may well be that by the time they're finished, we discover that we're underfunding. But at least we'll be able to know. I would have a lot of sympathy with some of these complaints in 2007 right through to 2011. I don't have any sympathy with them now. I think the Finance Department and Social Work Department are doing what we asked them to do, and at the conclusion of it, we should be able, through the budget tracking throughout the year, to be able to determine whether we are funding our services correctly. And I would move the recommendations.
Councillor Dyke.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to thank Paul, actually. I think it's very important, and I think as members we need to remember that obviously we've set objectives, and that obviously there will be risks to those objectives, but we need to manage those risks, and I'm pleased with the assurance that I hear from Paul today.
That we've had the recommendations moved by Councillor Dick. I'm happy to second those. No other members, right? For that. Move on to item 14, Capital Investment Strategy Monitoring 2013-14. Period ended 30th of June. Mr. Garrett.
Thank you. This is the first monitoring report that's been brought forward under the revised capital investment strategy that was agreed by this committee at its meeting last October. As reflected in the report, the approved programmes are generally progressing well. We're currently projecting that over 98% of the approved programme will be expended in the current financial year. Appendix 2 to the report provides an overall summary on each of the identified corporate priority projects and asset class capital programmes. And these summaries will be backed up by much more detailed reports on individual asset classes, which will be taken to the relevant service committees, starting with the PHE committee this month. As reflected in the report, we're currently projecting a slippage of just under £500,000 in the current financial year. Under the new arrangements, we're keen to ensure that where monies aren't being fully used, there's an opportunity for these amounts to be released and for members to consider whether they wish to reinvest these amounts in alternative priority investment. And what we're currently doing at the minute through the Capital Investment Strategy Group is identifying opportunities for that. And the intention is to bring a report back to this committee at its next meeting, asking members to consider whether they wish to allocate that funding to any alternative proposals. The recommendations are for noting, Chair, but happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Councillor Dick.
I'm glad to see we're getting through a capital programme. It's been a complaint in many previous years about slippage. Glad to see this. At the risk of being slightly parochial, could I refer to 4.6 and 7? And just ask that my understanding is that the correct financial allocation will be given to ensure that that Spinnar Harbour wall is fixed. And is it possible to get an idea of a time scale? I don't necessarily expect it from finance, but I would like an assurance anyway that the allocation will be made to ensure that the work's done as soon as possible.
Yeah, there's a report coming to the PHE committee on this next week. The approach that's been taken as reflected in the report is that PHE will accelerate funding that's been allocated from financial year 2014-15, bring it forward this year to make sure those works can be taken forward. But what this report is reflecting is that members may wish to consider providing an additional allocation to avoid that impact on an infrastructure programme next year. But those works are being progressed. I don't have the timescale, unfortunately.
That's the answer I hope for. Thank you very much.
Councillor Geddes.
Thanks, Leader. Minor point. Last two bullet points in paragraph 4.5, sir. I take it, in fact, that these will be, used on an either-or basis, i.e., combination of both in appropriate circumstances.
Councillor Nicholson.
Just in Councillor that mentioned 4.6, I just wonder whether this partial collapse, was it a natural event? Was it the damage caused? Was there any responsibility attached to this, to any persons causing that? And if there were other means of reclaiming the costs?
Mr. Haswell, are you aware of any
the rumour factory in Stranraer has it, somebody pulled it down with a dredger. The harbour's been there for a very long time. There are investigations ongoing as to the cause. I need to come back to the members because I don't know the correct answer to that. As I say, I have heard the rumours as well, Councillor Nicholson. Whether they're correct or not, it's a different matter.
Councillor Smith.
It's in relation to 5.1. Obviously, in June, we agreed to receive a report on the criteria we applied in referring slippage on capital projects. It wasn't as much the criteria. We know what the criteria is. If there's an overspend or slippage of 10% or £50,000, or a project is 3 months or more late, then that automatically should be referred to the scrutiny committee. Now, that was a policy agreed a way back, I think, probably, certainly by 2010, possibly maybe even earlier than that. And as far as I can see, not a single project that meets that criteria has ever been referred to the scrutiny committee. Now, we agreed in June to get a report. I just wonder why there's been a delay in that report. And it's worth pointing out that we actually agreed in, I think, May 2011, we actually agreed to receive a report on that particular issue, and that never ever happened. So we've never ever been told what projects meet that criteria, and we haven't. And I could absolutely guarantee not a single project has ever been referred to the scrutiny committee for analysis. Now, I appreciate the officers wanted to change that criteria, and we actually got a report to policy committee, I think it was February 2011, asking us to change it. Sorry, it was May 2011, asking us to change it, but members of this committee unanimously agreed not to change that criteria and to go ahead with that particular action. But it's never happened, and I want to know why it's never happened, and I want to know when we'll get a report telling us more details of why it's not happened.
We'll provide the member that report. I think there are issues about the levels that Councillor Smith has mentioned, and I know members said that they wanted to do that. The levels change by that amount on almost a monthly basis, but we will bring back a report to members. Paul Garrett and I discussed that issue, and there is a paragraph in the report which confirms that we will bring something back to members at the next meeting in relation to that. Can I point out that if members look at the report, some of these issues are not in fact slippage. They're circumstances which have come forward. For example, Bilbiti, we've got the money. It's not slippage. It means we can't spend more money than you can spend. Likewise, in the non-schools property, there was a project contained in that report that went to members in March, which had no chance of ever reaching the stocks in the current financial year. We need to get smarter as officers in how we bring these reports forward. We accept that. But Councillor Smith's point is well made and well taken. We will come back to members at the next meeting on this issue.
Councillor McClung.
Yeah, Chair, it's almost like when the wee boy was asking the skillist, who knocked down the walls of Jericho, and he said it wasn't me, sir. By the time it got to the director, he wasn't really fussy whether wee Johnny knocked down the wall or no. He was only concerned with who's going to build it. I'm surprised, Alec, referring to the rumour factory, when it's well known to the question that Ronnie asks, the council knew about this issue 79 years ago, where the harbour was collapsing and subsiding. You could see it. But what we didn't do was respond to that at the time, and it would have been a lot less than what it is. Again, it's a known fact, and no rumour factory. The wall has never been sealed at the particular subsidence, and it was a matter of the tide continued coming in and out, and the seepage. Now what's being is not clear is when the dredger or the dredging work that took place in the particular part of the harbour, that caused further effect on the infrastructure, and then the whole harbour that part of the harbour has completely subsided and it's fenced off. So, like the director, the people of Sederunt want to know when is it going to be fixed, and the question has been asked. And it's pleasing to see 4.6 here, that money's being brought forward and that it will be fixed. As I say, the people I represent is that I want it fixed sooner rather than later. So, you know, if that's at P&H next week, then great. But, you know, I think it was a director that once said lessons have to be learned. You know, when something is reported, it's how we address it, and that's been ongoing for some 79 years. Not 79, I don't think, but 729. Yeah, so it has been known. So I'd be interested to see the report on the investigation as to what that comes up with and where it points its finger.
With that, I have no further indication of speech. Are we happy to note 2.1 and 2.2? Item 15, Treasury Management Report. Are you taking that one, Mr. Garrett?
Yes, thanks. This report effectively monitors the Council's Treasury Management activities in the current year to date. It's very similar to the report considered by full Council at its meeting last week, in that during this period of low interest rates, we've not been doing much in terms of long-term borrowing. We've been taking advantage of low rates on short-term borrowing, and you've seen the advantage of that, the benefit of that through the loan charges underspends. As reflected in this report, what we're actually expecting now, based on recent announcements, that those low rates are likely to continue for a fair period now. So what I've said in the report is we'll bring forward a review of the loan charges budget as part of the current budget development process to assess. We're always wary in terms of taking advantage of temporary positions and amending our budgets, but we need to make sure that if there's an opportunity to do that on a prudent and realistic basis, the members get the chance to consider that as part of this current budget process. We'll make sure that report comes forward. Nothing else to add to the report, Chair. The recommendations are for noting. Thanks.
Councillor Dick.
Yeah, thanks for that, Paul. That's part of what I wanted to know. Can I just ask in relation to the 15% of gross debt that represents our short-term debt, given what you've said and the likelihood of taking opportunities as they present themselves, where the likelihood is interest rates will remain low, do you see that increasing at all? Do you have any idea of what that percentage might reach?
It has crept up. It would potentially increase a bit above that. The Treasury Management Policy that you've agreed allows us parameters within 0 to 25% short-term debt. So we're still well within that at the minute. What we're trying to balance at the minute is not exposing ourselves to the interest rate increases when they do move. So we probably won't push it as far as that 25% level, but we'll consider that as part of the current review we're doing. It's likely to move up probably slightly, but not to the 25% level we're allowed to.
No other indications. Speakers. We have the recommendations to note 2.1 and 2.2. According to the clock, it's 12:39. I would propose that we break now for lunch till 1 o'clock. This budget monitoring report, 2013-14, the period ended 30th of June. We have Mr. Hinton Smith here. Is there any factual updates to the paper? If you come to the front.
Sorry about that. The Chief Executive Service is looking at that so it will break even by the end of the year. And we do have, at the moment, a overspend in business management, which is within some of the print unit and some budgetary pressures that we're dealing with at the moment. In fact, the print unit we've made some pretty good progress on, and I'm hoping that by the next time I report here, that we'll be saying that service will be breaking even. We're on track to make the savings that are being required of us for 13-14, and if people, the policy development tracker also outlines the progress we've made with the Modern Apprentice Scheme and Graduate Employment Scheme projects. I can say that since I prepared that report, the Modern Apprentice Scheme has actually been in the process of taking on 40 MAs that will be starting in mid-September, and we have a further 50 to start approximately in January 2014. So the forecast spend that I've reported for the MA scheme, which is 659,000, it's actually gone up to 868,000, and that's very much in line with the original projection when we were scoping out the MA scheme over 5 years.
Members' questions? Councillor Geddes.
Page 199, sir. It's Appendix 2, the box, it says non-schools property rationalisation. However, there have been delays in the vacation of some properties by service departments, and there is consequently a potential shortfall of £50,000 against the agreed savings. Why have these delays? Why have they occurred, and what's the nature of them?
The delays have occurred in relation to certain moves within social work services and the community and customer services. I have addressed the community and customer services issue within the last day. The social work service one has been addressed. It related to the fact that the suitability of the accommodation being made available was disputed. These have now been addressed, and I fully anticipate that the moves will happen very quickly.
Thank you. Councillor Maitland.
Can I have a little bit of assurance about the issue of the print partners? In paragraph 3.2, the report talks about including an expansion of external printing with partners. And I just wondered exactly what that means. Put it this way, I'm wanting to be sure that we're not displacing other people's business, expanding into commercial stuff when arguably that's not our prime remit. Can I have a little bit of an explanation?
Got Councillor Scobie on the same subject.
Same subject, Chair, and it's one that goes in and out of the print unit in Stranraer. Then my understanding in talking to member of staff that there is potential to do a lot more in the print unit without necessarily going down the road as is being suggested there in taking on private work. And that's within other our own local authority and indeed other local authorities, including Health Board, etc. So there is the potential, and indeed what would be good to follow 3.2 and 3 here is perhaps a further report as to what the potential is and just how much what the print unit does in terms of many of our brochures, the stuff that goes out under the council's name, whether indeed it is done in-house and why, if it is not, why it's not. So, notwithstanding, the report as contained in 3.2 and not necessarily extending to the private sector, I think we've got to seriously look at, what the print unit does, what it can do, and why it's not engaged more fully if indeed that is the case.
Can I reassure members this is not going out to the private sector? We're doing work on behalf of the NHS, Dumfries and Galloway, who are our partners. In terms of the work the print unit is doing, members adopted a print strategy some 2 years ago when we changed away from a trading account in the print unit. The print strategy requires the removal of photocopiers from various places. In education, there are a number of very large photocopiers which schools tend to use. The print unit are out doing a sales job with the schools and saying, we can do your printing a lot cheaper than you can using photocopiers within the schools. And we are now beginning to bring in work from the schools where stuff would previously have been printed on a photocopier within the school. Issues such as deadlines are being addressed, and we are trying to move forward to ensure that the print unit does as much of the council's print business as is possible. I'm happy to come back to Councillor Scobie with details. I'm aware of the discussions he's had with the member of staff concerned. I'm happy to bring forward details of how the print unit is performing, and that'll do that as part of the performance report, which I bring forward on CCA on CES.
Councillor McGregor.
Thank you, Chair. I realise this is a budget monitoring report, but it was just in relation to the modern apprenticeship scheme, and it's good to hear that we're actually going to forecast to spend more within that budget than was originally anticipated in these papers. Just from my perspective, I have had a look at the variety of opportunities that are being given through the MA scheme, and it's really, really heartening to see there's a very broad range of service areas and job descriptions right across the region. At what point will we get information back as to how many applicants have applied for each modern apprenticeship? And because I think anecdotally we maybe have a number of pupils leaving school who are applying for 2 or 3, but it might be quite low numbers. And I just would like to know or have assurances that the promotion of this scheme within the schools and colleges is absolutely maximised, because I'm not convinced it is yet. And I think it's been incredibly successful, but I think it could be opened up to even more pupils if we were just a bit more proactive. But I would commend the opportunities that have arisen from it, and the fact that we are forecast to spend nearly our full budget in this year.
Happy to take that on board.
With that, if there's no, Councillor McComb.
Thanks, Chair. I assume the print work which is being done for schools is for pre-planned items such as prospectuses, and there is no interference with normal classroom work.
It's not cost effective to do small print runs. The cost effectiveness is pre-planned work, but there's little point in a school secretary standing printing 1,000 brochures when we can do it automatically.
With that, we're being asked to note 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3. Move on to item 17. Community and customer services. Budget monitoring report for period ended 30th June 2013.
We're projecting a balanced budget at the end of 2013-14. A number of issues of detail which Richard can take, if members don't mind, please.
No. And Councillor Smith.
We'll refrain from asking the leader the questions I asked him earlier on the basis we didn't answer them then, so I'm sure he won't answer them now. But I do think that in relation to some of the savings options and some of the concerns that we've raised in the past, that I hope that when it comes to next year's budget setting process, we won't go down the same route, because the figures show quite clearly that that hasn't worked in relation to community facilities. But I'd quite like to know when this committee, as the committee that oversees that department, will actually receive a report specifically on that savings option in terms of community facilities, and when we'll actually receive a report on adult education savings. I've got a minute from a while back of the Labour group and the Chief Executive and the Director of the department given a commitment that we would have a breakdown of exactly where the savings have been made within adult education and how that's impacted on courses, staffing, etc. And we've still not actually had that, and I think this committee, as the committee that oversees that department, is entitled to see that information as well. But you know, despite the fact that that's £350,000 worth of savings between the two the two subjects, we haven't actually had a breakdown to this committee of those savings options, and I think we should. I mean, I have no idea where the £87,000 is being saved in relation to the community facilities review, and I think we should be given that information. We'd be given a list of buildings, but no breakdown of actual savings.
I'm happy to provide that information to members at the next meeting. Can I say the community facilities review, the figure of £87,000 is well understated. We're now projecting £194,000, is it, Richard?
Yeah, just for clarity, Alec, the 87 is the in-year savings because of the extensive consultation. And in a full year, those agreed properties will achieve 195k.
With due respect, that's not the savings this financial year. The savings this financial year is £87,000, because we took a process that said we would just agree the savings and then leave it to somebody else to come up with the actual options.
Had a undertaking that will be at the next committee meeting. Councillor Geddes, then Councillor McComb.
I'll give way to Councillor McComb, sir.
Councillor Smith has mentioned the need for a review with regard to facilities rationalisation. I think a similar review is required for community and customer services integration. We are aware that there are savings from the reduced manpower involved. What are the costs which have been incurred with regard to capital spending as well?
I'm happy to provide that information as well.
Yeah, Leader, and that's why I gave way to, well, apart from being innately courteous, of course, that's why I gave that's why I gave way to Councillor McComb, because at the end of the day I was aware that that was a point he wanted to raise. And let me say for the record that, you know, we have not had this information on a holistic basis this year. We should have had it, and I would argue, you've heard me in this before, Leader, and forgive me, but at the end of the day, I would argue that certain of the decisions that we took, you know, were unsafe on the basis of lack of proper information. Yes, I appreciate a response from my colleague on my right here. So be it, but let me put the marker down now. I won't say there was fundamental flaws in the process last year, particularly of property rationalisation in certain areas. I would argue more fundamentally there was no process at all. And it's interesting, in fact, that the Health Secretary and the Westminster Government got his colours comprehensively lowered in the High Court on the basis of wholly inadequate process. And there was a tremendous political commentary article in the Independent at the time spelling out just exactly where, in fact, at the end of the process, they gave them the benefit of the doubt. They said it was a process, but where it was fundamentally flawed and deficient. And I would like to think, you know, as Colin Smith has already said, that we will learn from the exercise in the running of next year's budget, and it will not go down that route again on that basis. I'm grateful to you for your forbearance. This must be the nth time you've heard me on the same subject, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Everyone learns from experience, so I'm sure that Councillor Nicholson.
Just on that, I think you know, it should be a balanced view in this. I think, to be fair to the officers, it was the decision of councillors that was flawed.
Leader, can I come back? I was not under any way, shape or form criticising officers. My comments were directed at elected members, and particularly elected members of the administration, of which I am a part.
Yeah, Chair, and without harping back, yeah, the decision was made at, at the budget setting day, and while it was democratically arrived at, nevertheless that did not make it right in terms of delegating to officers what effectively is the responsibility of elected members in terms of the impact, and we are now seeing the effect of that before us, reflecting some 87,000 against 200, notwithstanding its part year. I made the point at the Policy and Resources meeting following the budget setting meeting that in terms of the West, and particularly the Wigtown area, that there should be a caveat for us to sit down and consider, notwithstanding the savings, because there was no detail to the effect of the amount of savings of £200,000 on the closures, on the integration and so forth. So I would support Councillor McComb in terms of the review, and also going alongside that the capital spend, because what has emerged has been that there has been or there will be capital spend to put back the building in George Street, and that is a matter of record. That I raised that again at a Policy and Resources Committee meeting, that was not information that we had open and transparent. It may have been a line in a budget, but it was not before us in an open and transparent way to provide us with the information. That has been the subject of a complaint, and no doubt that will take its course. So, you know, I will remain consistent, along with my colleague in the non-aligned group, to say that we have been less than satisfied with the process. And indeed, at one of the area committees, the Wigton area committees, I think to a person, even within the administration, then they were not at all happy with the process, notwithstanding it was a member decision, but it was delegated to officers, and there was great criticism of that. So, you know, I think lessons, as you rightly say, have got to be learned in terms of what's delegated down, but the net effect is that there are communities facing community closures where, you know, they don't feel they've been properly consulted, and similar to services where the community in Stranraer were consulted and were not in favour of some of the moves.
I have no further speakers. We're asked to note recommendations at 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3, and we've been undertaking as what bring back a report to the next meeting. Move on to item 18. I have no public business, further business to be determined by this committee. Item 19, Local Government Scotland Act 1973. I'd ask that we consider adoption of a resolution to exclude the public from the meeting in terms of section 50A, subparagraph 4, and of paragraph 12 of the Local Government Scotland Act 1973.